Student comes in and says to me, Professor Loury, is it okay if I talk about my own life experience? To which my answer is, hell no, it's not okay. Well, my lived experience is this. I don't care about your lived experience. What I care about is you finding a half dozen sources in the literature, books and articles, you fashioning an argument with a thesis and with a structure, you justifying your argument based upon those sources, and you coming to a conclusion that's persuasive, and you have 5 pages to do it in. I don't want you to tell me about what it felt like to be a Black kid who lived in a poor family. That's not exactly what you came here for. You didn't come here to be. You came here to learn how to know. Being is not knowing.
There's a sense that if a Black person does start working at doing these white things, using the kind of reasoning that you're expected to engage in as a graduate student in a typical discipline, for example, if they get criticized, they think it's racism. They can't imagine that the criticism might be that they just need to get better at what they were doing. And they're encouraged to think of it that way. And I worry about that, because then what you get is, well, yeah, I tried to man up, I tried to woman up, but I had all this racism coming at me from the faculty and I just couldn't stand it anymore. And I can see how they would process it that way, because there's so many people telling them that that's what it must be, when really it's just that doing the proper work sometimes means that you have to be told that you're doing it wrong. I remember when I was a grad student, I was learning how to make an argument in linguistics. Some of it is rather lawyerly. It's problem sets. It's a kind of closer reasoning than I think many people have any reason to know linguistics is about. And when I went in, as I've told you, I was undertrained at first, and I was trying to do my thing, and I wasn't doing it quite up to the standards of what linguists really do. And I had gotten to the point where I was working out my dissertation proposal. And I gave a talk to the department on what I was doing. And, I was smart and I taught good, et cetera. But there were a couple of people, white men, who gently but firmly let me know that I wasn't really up to snuff, and that in order to make these arguments in a way that other linguists were really going to listen to, instead of enjoying the way I talk and welcoming me because I'm a pretty color. They didn't say that. I don't think they were thinking that. But if you're Black in academia after about 1975, you can coast on that a lot. If I was going to not coast on that and actually make arguments that people listen to, I had to get better. Now, I know that many, many Black graduate students in that situation, I know, I've seen it, would have thought that this was racism, that these two guys were giving me trouble because of me being Black. And you know what? Just maybe, especially with one of them, maybe there's a little of that, but not enough to matter. What they were telling me was what I needed to know to become a linguist worth his salt. And I did become one. I'm not saying I became a genius, but I needed to know what those two people said to me. And one of them, I'm going to say and thank him because I'm in touch with him. Bill Poser, I'm glad that you took me aside. I needed it. The other one I'm not saying anything about. But I think a lot of people like me of my generation have been trained to think that that was racism. And then you drop out, or you don't take their advice and you end up getting jobs based on the fact that people want you to fill out some sort of diversity quotient. That's not a good situation. I think in economics, that's less likely. But in many necks of the woods, that's the sort of thing where that happens. Have you seen students think that getting constructive criticism is racism and pulling away from the field? This is a genuine question.
I'm sure it goes on. I can't give you any anecdotal evidence to that effect. I mean, I do criticize my own students. Black students as Roland Fryer, the great Roland Fryer was one of my students way back when he was still writing his dissertation at Penn State. And he would come and spend the summer at my shop. I had a little institute at Boston University where I was teaching at that time in the late 90s and the early aughts, called the Institute on Race and Social Division. Roland would come and we'd sit up at the blackboard and we'd work through some of these technical problems and stuff. And he'd make mistakes. And I said, that was the dumbest thing I ever saw. It's like, come on, what? I just told you. Come on, can't you solve the problem? I would be really hard on him. I would, Good. And he chafed a little bit. And he jokes about it now. He would, at my 70th birthday party where he did a little stand-up routine, Roland did. He stood up and kind of roasted me, because I was this hard taskmaster. But I don't think he ever thought that I was abusing him. I think he thought I was stealing him to the task at hand, which was, you're Black. Everybody's going to think you're second rate. They're going to think you don't know how to dot your I's and cross your T's, and that you can't really look any more deeply than the superficial thing. And, my name's attached to your dissertation, man. I want you to actually know what the fuck you're talking about when you get the hard question in the seminar. I don't want to be, my own reputation diminished by your mediocre performance. So I'm going to be just as hard on you as those guys at Chicago or Harvard or Stanford would be on you when you stood up, give your job talk. They're going to want to know what's behind the epsilon and the delta, and they're going to want to make sure that you understand what you're talking about, that you're in command of the literature and that you're in the command of the techniques. So, I mean, this is from my personal experience. I can imagine that there are a lot of graduate students of color who, when confronted with a hard-nosed, tough prof who said, you didn't get it right, that was ridiculous, that argument was silly, why don't you actually learn what you're talking about before you come in and waste my time, would take it as a racial affront and therefore not get the benefit of the challenge and the discipline and the inspiration, if you will, to be all that they could be. I mean, do I dispel the doubts that they have about me because I'm Black by performing in a extraordinary manner to the best of my ability to show that I'm up to it? Or do I dismiss those doubts with the back of my hand in a sneer by saying, you people are racist. I'm not into the politics of respectability. I'm not going to try to prove anything to you. F you and your corpus and your canon and your disciplines. Doesn't speak to me. I don't see myself in your books. Seems to me that that's a choice that people of color entering into challenging areas of study have to make. Do we elect to grasp the nettle, dispel the doubt of the doubters, and perform? Or do we, in a way, retreat from the challenge of performance by rejecting the whole enterprise as being, intrinsically white supremacist? That's when they get rid of the test for getting into the exam school. Isn't that what they're doing? Rather than saying, okay, you have your test, I got my study. I'm going to my study to get ready for your test. When I come out of there, I'm going to kick your test in the butt. That's dispelling anybody's doubt about you. Or do you dismiss the thing altogether by saying, that's your test, I don't do well on it, but the reason I don't do well on it is because your test is racist and you need to get rid of your test? When they get rid of the test, they're basically saying to you, we agree with you. You're not up to the challenge of this test. We agree with you. Let's see if we can't find a place for you nonetheless. We need technicians who write code, and we need, swagger. We need lawyers who actually can master the challenge of doing the case law and writing the brief. And then we need,
passion.
Hail fellows well met who can, passionately sell the firm's services and can generate client, whatever, Well, it's okay if the Black people specialize in the soft skills, because we know that the hard stuff is what we have Asians to do for us.
Do these people really think that's okay? That's the thing. It seems to me that this whole anti-racist idea these days is premised on exactly what you're saying, that we're supposed to think that this is the way it's supposed to be. This is Ibram Kendi saying, don't have tests. Instead, evaluate students on the basis of their desire to know. Evaluate students on how much they know about their environment. It reminds me of, there's an episode of Different Strokes with Gary Coleman and Todd Bridges, these little Black boys, and they are adopted by a white guy, Conrad Bain. In one of the early episodes of Different Strokes, they were making this cute point that these ghetto boys, as they were called then, they were smart too. They just knew about their own environment. And so they had the boys kind of give a quiz to Mr. Drummond, and it turns out, and what the answer to one of the questions was blues, boogie, and barrel house. And my mother pointed out, they're too young to actually know what those things are. And I remember thinking to myself, how would they know what barrel house is? But still, that was the point, that's what makes them smart. That was like a cute little routine on a charmingly bad sitcom. And yet I get the feeling that that's really what it's supposed to be, that if a kid can, talk about the names of the streets in his neighborhood and maybe which ones are dangerous, that is the equivalent of learning how to code or, learning your cases in Greek. And the code is much more important. I'm talking about little linguistics. But what about the real world? What about lawyering and things like this? We're really in a dangerous place. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think one of the ways this manifests itself is in the emphasis now that's regarded widely as acceptable on subjectivity. Student is to write an essay. The student comes in and says to me, Professor Loury, is it okay if I talk about my own life experience? To which my answer is, hell no, it's not okay. Well, my lived experience is this. I don't care about your lived experience. What I care about is you finding a half dozen sources in the literature, books and articles, you fashioning an argument with a thesis and with a structure, you justifying your argument based upon those sources, and you're coming to a conclusion that's persuasive, and you have 5 pages to do it in. I don't want you to tell me about what it felt like to be a Black kid who lived in a poor family. That's not exactly what you came here for. You didn't come here to be. You came here to learn how to know. Being is not knowing.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I'm with you on that. Students will ask me, how much I-ness can they use? And it's not only the Black ones, but it's, can I put myself in? And I tell them, talk about adjusting to the modern world. I figure I'm not going to pretend it's 1915. I say, you could put I-ness in. After all, I have I-ness in everything that I write. But I'm told actually that even in my academic linguistics work, there's too much I-ness. I was told that a couple of years ago. Interesting, by a white guy. And he said it gently but firmly, you say I too much. And I didn't think he's a racist. I thought, you know what? He's probably right. And it actually seems to put some people off. I need to be less I-ful in my academic writing. I think a lot of me's would say that this person who said this to me was a racist. And I just don't think he was. He was giving me constructive criticism. But I tell the students, I-ness is fine, but make a case for me. I said, I don't want to hear about, I wouldn't tell them this, but I don't want to hear about your feelings. You make a lawyerly case for me about something, teach me something. And I said, it can be about any number of things, including things I don't really care about, but make a case within your I-ness. Don't have it be about your subjective feelings. Yeah, because the subjective feelings, quite simply, are easy. I remember cheating a few times when I was in college and writing some subjective things. I remember thinking in college, I'm Black. If I write about, something that happened to me once, that will get me by. I'm lucky. I can do that. The guy living next door, Mark Badelman, he can't do that, but I can do that. And then I can party a little bit more tonight. I'm not accusing other students of doing that on purpose, but I knew that the subjectivity was easy, as opposed to stepping outside of yourself and analyzing, which is harder. That's what education is supposed to be. You're being duped X. You're being led out. Education, not being taught to explore yourself. I remember at Berkeley, one of the African-American studies undergrads said to me quite confidently, and he was thought of as godly. He's got the dreadlocks. He's got a certain sturdy, slightly pissed off demeanor. He's got a very difficult history. And here he is in this department. Everybody thought he was solid. And he said, well, if I couldn't learn about myself, I wouldn't want to be here. And I didn't say anything because you have to choose your battles. But I remember thinking, no, that's not why I went to college, to learn about myself. I already knew about myself. Or if I'm going to learn about myself, it's going to be in various ways that have nothing to do with what I'm going to learn in class. But I thought, he doesn't want this unless it's about learning about negritude, et cetera. And I thought, this is a different way of being in school. It's a different kind of department, this African-American Studies department. And yet he was clearly encouraged in that and thought of as one of the best students. But I will say, I think I'm keeping this person anonymous enough to say, I was trying to get him to step outside of himself a little bit in trying to work with him. And I just couldn't do it. He didn't want to step outside. He wanted to be reaffirmed in his status as a subaltern, not in education. And yet at this point, I feel like that whole view is winning. It's just, and I really want a lot of these people to tell us, what do you think of an education as being? And if you're not going to learn how to code, what is it that you're going to learn how to do? set up an NGO or something? Because even with that, you're going to have to step outside of yourself to master certain skills. I don't see these questions answered, and I hope that society can engage in one. I suspect that might be happening. I'm sensing a pushback lately against this orthodoxy. I think a lot of it is because we're coming off of our laptops and interacting again. And I'd like to see how that goes. If whiteness is so oppressive, what exactly is the blackness that is now going to rule the world? What is it? And people are going to have conferences where they explore it, but what's going to come out of it? What is this blackness? I'll be interested to see what it actually is in terms of running a world.